Parappa the Rapper by Mike Sholars has become one of my favorite books from Boss Fight Books. This is one of the more personal stories that just happens to include video game history in it. I read this book while I was camping. It was mosquito season in northern Michigan, and this book gave me a great excuse to stay in the cabin and not get eaten alive by mosquitoes and deer flies. That might be one of the many reasons why I like this book so much. We get a brief history of music and rhythm games. It's a fascinating genre of gimmick games that generally revolve around a Simon Says mechanic. In many of them, you need to mimic the commands on the screen and press the right buttons at the right time. Dance Dance Revolution is the game that I remember the most from this genre. Rock Band is probably the game that many people would associate with it, and many of these games started in the arcades. I remember hearing about them in the late 90s and whatnot. I believe I heard a DDR from my friend Drew and saw it at a Cedar Point arcade when I was in Ohio. I could be confusing this with Beatmania or even Guitar Hero, but I believe I saw it at Cedar Point first, and then later saw a similar game or one of the others that I mentioned in Chicago when we visited there for a Chemical Brothers concert. Either way, these games were huge for brief periods of time and quickly faded away because the gimmick really isn't all that great once you get it down. Parappa the Rapper wasn't the first game like this, but it seems to have left more of an impression. It might have been the fact that there was a story attached to the gameplay, the memorable characters, or simply nostalgia for a time when video games were released a little bit differently. I'll get more into that in a later section. I really wasn't too sure where to put this part, so I kind of wanted to just tack it on to the end of this section. I appreciate all the Aerosmith jokes in this book. I liked their music a lot when I was a kid, and seeing them in this book made me kind of smile. They also have an interesting role in the history of music games, being in Revolution X and also the Guitar Hero series. You could have told the history of music games without mentioning Aerosmith at all, but it is funny that they were in as many games as they were, and I just like Mike's sense of humor when he brings them up. Of the three bands that headlined the fictional music festival in Wayne's World 2, Aerosmith was the only one to get a video game, which I think is kind of a shame. We really should have gotten a Pearl Jam and a Van Halen game as well. It is a shame that Journey wasn't mentioned here because they had a video game. That's about it. That's really all I know about Journey. Anyway, let's move on to the next section. Parappa the Rapper is kind of a unique game for a variety of reasons. For starters, it's a really short game. Mike points this out and tries to put it into perspective for the reader. It's only 6 stages long, and it can take up to about 2 hours to beat if you aren't very good at it. That's kind of crazy when you think about it and you try to put it into perspective for today's video games, where people get really upset if a game's only like 12 to 14 hours long. Yeah, I don't know why. Sometimes with remakes, like I know the Resident Evil 3 remake, there were a handful of people that were upset that it was only like 9 hours long. Well, it's a remake of a game that was only about 9 hours long, so I'm not really sure what they were expecting, but whatever. If this short of a game was released today at full retail price, like it was back in the late 90s, people would really be freaking out. In the 90s, we were probably more accepting of this, especially if you only got like 2 to 4 games per year, like I did. You really didn't complain a whole lot about the game that you got, unless it was just flat out broken like some PC games were when they shipped, or if you're playing it and it just is kind of terrible. Sometimes you put up with terrible games, Other times, you just went outside and found something better to do. The gameplay is similar to the other music games that I mentioned, but you can also do some freestyling in it, which comes into play when you try to get into the cool mode. To advance to the next level, you just need to maintain a ranking of good. The other rankings are bad and awful. The chapters in this book lead you through each stage and provide you with some context that ties into Mike's life, or certain instances of Mike's life. The goals of each stage are very relatable to a teenager's life, or relatable to somebody who's thinking back on their own life. Mike describes these as kind of mundane stakes, as failure in real life would only impact yourself or one person. It isn't like you're fighting some old god with only a sword that you found by chance. There were two parts when Mike is talking about the stages of the game that kind of struck a chord with me. The first was the driving test stage, and the second was the boss rush stage. One as Parappa trying to get his driver's license, the other is a boss rush mode about trying to get to the bathroom before you crap your pants. The stakes for failure are isolated to Parappa. If he doesn't get his driver's license, he's really the only one that's inconvenienced. And all he has to do in order to rectify this is try to get his driver's license again. He'll be embarrassed, but it doesn't really affect anyone else but him. Much like the boss rush mode, he'll be embarrassed if he doesn't get to the bathroom in time because he's going to crap his pants. It'll be really humiliating for him, but no one else is really going to be impacted by it. And it'll probably humiliate him in front of his would-be girlfriend, but again, if they really like each other, they'll move past that. It's not like, he's in the third grade and he craps his pants while playing dodgeball, where everyone's going to remember that for the rest of his time in school. He's a teenager. He doesn't have that much longer to go. Plus, he can always go away to college and everybody will forget about it. With each stage, Mike brings up some part of his life. One thing he brings up reminded me of something that seems kind of lost to time. And that was learning about new video games from demo discs. This ties into some of the other things that while I was reading this, I said, oh, I remember something like that happening to me. It was just kind of one of the cool parts about this book where you just get reminded of something. Mike saw Parappa the Rapper on a PS1 demo disc. It was one of the many ways you could learn about new games back in the 90s, and they would kind of allow you to play small tutorials. So you would only play like the first chapter of something, or the first section, or you would play the first level, or something along those lines. And yeah, they were everywhere. Sony would actually give these away, and you would get them through their magazine, much like you would through PC games and that sort of thing. And that just reminded me of all the different times that I would get these demo discs, or my friends would get them, and we'd trade these demo discs around and just keep playing little snippets of each game, almost like the shareware version of Doom or something like that. And it reminded me of playing Daggerfall. And this is going off on a tangent, and I'm sorry, but it reminded me of playing Daggerfall because you could play the game forever, but you could only get one level. So you could gain experience and move up to like level 2, but then that was the end of it. You wouldn't be able to keep going, or at least you wouldn't be able to keep progressing your character. So I played that demo for just days, not even hours, but I would play it for like days. And that's just one of those things that it feels like it's lost. You don't really get that sort of stuff anymore. And it's just really cool that I can read a book like this and read about someone else's experience with demo discs and kind of go, oh yeah, I remember doing something similar to that. So let's circle back to cool mode for a minute. Like I mentioned, this is one of the 4 modes that you can achieve during the game, but it can only be achieved after beating the game. Then you enter kind of like a sandbox environment where you can pick any stage that you want to replay. Mike tries to explain how to achieve and stay in cool mode. He talks about his struggles with understanding how it can be achieved and how he learned about it. It's a very relatable story, as you know, even fans of a particular game, they can always learn something new about it. And people kind of forget that there's a whole selection of gamers that just play through the story mode and then move on with their lives. They don't necessarily play the game endlessly for hours to discover every single little secret of it. He mentions he didn't know the game became a sandbox after you beat it. How you could go to every stage, replay them. He also didn't really know that you could do the freestyle stuff after you complete one part of the song. And yeah, you were just kind of waiting for the next stage to start, or the next section of that song to start. So one section would end, and you can just kind of freestyle by clicking the buttons and trying to make a version of the song that fits in with the original theme or fits in with the original rhythm of what you just played. These freestyle sections are where you can achieve cool mode, and you need to play/rap in a way that kind of fits along with the song. And Mike brings up his struggles with it here. He mentions looking up YouTube videos of people doing it and his conversation with the game's creator. It's an excellent section of the book, but if you're looking for a pattern on how to reliably do it, that really isn't here, because basically what he found is you'd need to kind of button mash and then cross your fingers and hope that you did it right. It does raise some questions for me. Is there someone out there who's kind of cracked the code for this? Like, is there someone out there who has a set pattern of button presses that will reliably get you to and keep you in cool mode? If there is someone out there, they don't seem to have explained this, at least as far as I've found. And if you know of anyone, please put it in the comments below, because I'm sure anyone who stumbles across this might be very interested in it. While writing about these books, or recording the audio for a YouTube video about them, I always remember something I forgot to write down. Some memory from the book will pop up, and I won't know what to do with it. No matter how many notes I take while I'm reading, I always seem to forget something that I probably find more interesting than what I wrote down or what I said. In this case, it's the cutscenes. Parappa the Rapper is a very cutscene-heavy game. Mike writes about them and brings up how his opinions are either different or have changed, particularly with the sort of villain of the game. Joe Chin is Parappa's villain, sort of. As Mike points out, he's just living his life. He isn't all that concerned with Parappa. He isn't going out of his way to upstage Parappa. Joe Chin does provide Parappa with the inspiration to better himself. Our hero sees Joe and wants to be similar to him in some way. That's why he tries to learn karate, tries to learn how to bake, and get his driver's license. Even his choice of cake is bizarre, or to say the least. I mean, it's a seafood cake, but it's still something that he's doing in order to try to better himself. And his motivation to do that usually comes from Joe Chin. Another thing that I forgot to bring up and didn't really know where to put it was Mike writing about the people behind the music. Not just the game's developers, who he talks about quite a bit, but the voice actors who perform the songs, how he would try to get interviews with them or look for quotes about what they've said about the game. And he also brings up how the songs that they are performing change on how you're doing in the game. So if you're not doing well, certain parts of the music will kind of fade away. Along with the music, the boss character's demeanor changes. These range from being understandably frustrated with how bad you're doing to strangely laying an egg telling you that you need to try again. This is one of the better parts of the game, and it's a significant improvement from other rhythm games where the music just kind of stops or the crowd starts booing. I'm sure there are more things that I'm forgetting, but I did want to include those last two things because I thought they were still very interesting. I just couldn't remember where they would go in this script. This is the hard part about reviewing books like this. I write down so much and I forget so much from my notes going to my script. And then from going over the script, I tend to remember them and insert them into where I think they should go. But yeah, it's just me kind of guessing and trying to fit everything in as best I can. I don't really want to create a summary. I just want to include some of the parts that I find the most memorable about a book like this. So many parts of this book got a reaction out of me. I liked everything about this book. Mike tells a fascinating story about an iconic video game character from the 90s. While he isn't as big as he could have been, Parappa the Rapper means a lot to those who got into this game. It's always sad when you pass up a video game like this and you find out later that it's a fun experience. I'm not sure what it was about Parappa the Rapper that made me pass this one by back in 1997 and 1998. I guess I just didn't get the gameplay, which is probably true. But I remember seeing quite a few advertisements for it. I remember the demo disc that Mike brings up, and I remember a friend of mine liked it quite a bit. Hearing Mike's story about this game made me want to go and try it. So, yeah, I haven't really sat down and played the game yet, but it's on the pile of things that I need to check out. There is a ton of nostalgia in this book. Many of the things Mike writes about resonated with me in some way. I remember going to the video rental stores when I was little. The destination was different from the one that Mike went to because he talks about going to Blockbuster. I usually went to literally a general store in my small town. And he was looking for video games when I went out at his age looking for stuff. I was looking for horror movies because that general store gave no fucks. They would let you rent anything at the age of 10, regardless of what it was. So yeah, that's just my little own nostalgia and what I was thinking of when he was talking about rental stores. But yeah, a lot of kids in the 90s remember going to Blockbuster or remember renting video games and movies. I think Mike does an excellent job of telling the history of Parappa the Rapper and just what it means to him. This is a wonderful book, and one of the reasons why I like boss fight books, and I like what they're doing for video game literature. I'm looking forward to seeing what else they put out, and I kind of hope that they're going to be as good as Mike's book. So that's going to wrap it up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.